Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us on Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to GameStorm a prison crawl. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix. So as you heard, we're going to have another GameStorming episode, and this time we are going to GameStorm a prison adventure. So I thought it might be interesting to do because it seems like it's always one of those things that people want to do because it's a big classic trope, you know, to get arrested, to get put in jail, to escape and do the thing.
A trope, so much ability.
True. But there's lots of movies and stories where that's part of it, right?
Robin Hood for me. Prince of Thieves version. Well, I guess even in the cartoon version too.
Yeah, you get the rooster in the corner every town. Right on. So what we should mention is that it seems to me that I see lots of complaints from people that anytime that they do this, it sort of falls flat or the players get frustrated and the game kind of goes sideways and off the rails, right? So I think to start this off, we will break down some of the classic pitfalls and drawbacks to doing a prison adventure. And then when we go through and GameStorm this, we will sort of address those as we go and try and find ways to mitigate them as we go along. So do you want to start off on, well, first off, I guess maybe I should ask, have you played in a game where you had to go to prison or were arrested or captured or something like that?
I don't recall that that's ever been a thing, actually. I GM'd a Robin Hood 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. You guys were in prison.
Did we get arrested in that?
Well, no, but you were breaking
someone out. Yeah. Okay. But we weren't in prison, which sort of eliminates a lot of the
had to get into
crisis.
the prison to break someone out, though, right? Which could be a possible.
Yeah, so I guess keeping in mind the initial idea that I had was that the players would have to find a way to get into the prison to solve some kind of problem that exists inside the prison, whether that's recovering something or recovering someone or something along those lines, and that may be dictated by a couple of the options that I have here that I'll spell out here once we get going. So
you have like cool prison reference in a me or literature,
I didn't even think about that.
Or
why don't we break down some quick media then real quick? So I think The Rock is a good one. Now, obviously,
I forgot all about that one. Man,
boom!
I like that.
So that's
Alcatraz.
That's
right?
a great,
it's an
unescapable.
Island.
Yeah. Count of Monte Cristo.
Good. Yeah.
What else?
X-Men.
Oh,
the plastic prison
with Magneto. Yeah. What else?
Really, there's some cool superhero ones, but there are a couple of snippets in Marvel 1602, which I think is like a I like that crossover. Yeah. So Dark Tower sort of castle dungeon.
Now I'm going to say not the entire movie, but parts of it. I think Labyrinth, because when she falls into the oubliette and all that kind of stuff, there's some cool moments there where they're trying to figure things out and escape and whatever. And fundamentally, like the Labyrinth, now moments of it don't feel like a prison, but it sort of has some of that vibe to it, I guess. A little more lighthearted.
So The Princess Bride, that's really like a dungeon cell for one, but
I'm sure we're forgetting a bunch of them. And
Walking Dead. Sorry. Walking Dead.
Where they're in the prison.
Graphic novel and TV show.
Yeah.
And then what's that game our kids always play? Because that was kind of part of the inspiration for this too.
I agree.
What do they call that? It's like prison or something like that.
Prison Escape, I think, is what it quite literally is.
Okay.
I think. I don't know. It's on Xbox, and it's a game where they have to like do stuff and stay out of seg and all that kind of stuff.
Some interesting zombicide scenarios.
Yeah.
Setting up game.
Right. Really easy.
Too,
yeah.
so.
True that. If you do this in sort of a more modern context, yeah.
I know I had mentioned we were talking earlier about the Bastille. And there's a lot of stuff in that quill prison there.
Quills.
That's not really your traditional prison. It's sort of like luxury prison, at least that we send like Martha Stewart nowadays.
Well, and then one of the choices that I have sort of suits that actually. It's very close to that in theme. And then also if you looked where the Marquis de Sade was kept and that where Jeffrey Rush's character was very nice, but the rest of the prison not so much, right? And that was also an asylum. An insane asylum. So
the man in the iron mask had that
that's
sort of
what I was just going to say.
Also.
Yep. All right, so that's about a dozen or so right there. I think that's plenty, and I know there's a ton more to go through that we're barely scratching the surface because this just popped up quite literally just now. So that'll give you at least some basis if you're looking for some kind of inspiration for some things to look at. And those are actually pretty far apart in terms of like seriousness and genre. Yeah. That's a good
they have a good sci-fi one. Good episode of Doctor. They have like all of the people imprisoned in individual cells, and they like are diseases out of people into these like non-thinking people, and he ends up like setting all free.
That's interesting.
They're sort of zombies.
Which Doctor is that?
Regular people. That is a David Tennant episode.
Is it a Tennant episode?
Yeah.
I remember that one.
And what's her name? The world's last human, Cassandra.
Oh yeah,
the moisturize me skin lady.
Right on. All right, so what are some of the classic pitfalls or drawbacks that you've seen in prison games?
OMG, Star Wars. How did you forget that?
Oh, yeah.
Breaking Princess Leia out.
Yeah.
They end up in the trash compactor.
True.
Classic. Sorry, derailed
that.
I was trying to think of another sci-fi sort of one. Anywho.
Well, there are several. So, like, Chronicles of Riddick has a pretty good prison element if you want to do some prison stuff that's more sci-fi vibe.
Character.
I agree. Very cool.
Riddick.
Way underrated. So...
Really, the being able to cryo really walks that.
It's weird.
Cell feel.
Stack them in like coffins. All right, so classic pitfalls and drawbacks before we get derailed again. So what do you think? So the two that I most commonly see and I have felt is that one, there's just a general lack of choices because you're stuck in prison.
Like, well, you're in prison.
I agree. I don't disagree, but I think it bears mentioning that. So like part of the conceit of this is that you're going into prison, right? So part of the problem I think I've seen with people is that, and that I have felt as well, is that there's not a choice given. So there's this overwhelming encounter and you're going to get attacked and you're going to get captured and you're going to get locked up in some kind of, goblin POW camp or whatever, right? And when that happens, it strips all your gear away and all this kind of stuff. And so it kind of sucks because all the time that you spent accumulating stuff, right? And especially in a D&D style game where that's part of the goal of the game, right? All that stuff is just gone. So, and then along with that, it's very restrictive in what you're doing. So, because I think when most people think of a prison, they kind of want to do a real lockdown style prison where, and I understand the reasons why, because it makes you feel like you're overcoming more, but I think that can be difficult and sort of paralyzing for the players.
And also, I haven't done a ton of research, but I don't think very true to reality either. I mean, I'm sure, well, one, that's just too expensive to even be feasible. So, like, if you're talking about, not paying your taxes, like, those people are probably all in one big room.
Right.
Like, locked in. Mm-hmm. Like the drunk tanks of the common world,
Right.
Yeah, like men's section, women's section, and done.
Right.
Unless you're high profile or...
So the other one I have is it's very railroady because, again, I think that comes back to the limiting of choices. I think those two are very closely related because the players will feel like there's only one way out of this and we have to find the way that you thought of to get out of this. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm. So I think there's that's an easy fix because you just let them figure their way out of it and don't have some kind of preconceived notion of how it has to be done.
Stereotypical guards who are either tough or aloof. And I think that's part of the railroady thing too. But let's be honest, like people, especially in this, in that time period, exceptionally bribable.
Yeah.
I mean...
No, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that one. But yeah, sort of those boring guards.
Yeah, they're sitting there playing cards or they're yelling at you or, which, maybe happening some of the time, but it's probably not all the time.
So I think, and that ties directly to also prisoners being boring as well. So like you've got one cool one and then the rest of them are just sort of like, hi, I'm here for larceny. So I think those two directly tie back to this one kind of a lack of choices because if you don't have multiple interesting characters inside the prison, it sort of limits what the players are going to think. Oh, this guy isn't important. He's just,
like the idea of like even when they do that, the mock-up prison that's all fake in like V for Vendetta, right? But like he comes from a real prison and that whole conversation that happens back and forth between her and that other woman through notes being passed,
yes,
like is deeply impactful to her through the rest of the movie.
Right.
And so that's definitely an NPC that
example.
isn't flat. And, she ends up carrying that with her when she goes.
Mm-hmm. There's some great psychological manipulation stuff happening there.
Well, it's, possible to even end up with some side quests if you, are able to create meaningful NPC bonds.
Right.
Like, I'm never going to get out of here, but I need you to deliver a message.
So the next one I have is is the prison itself, the physical location, the setting of this thing being flat. So when we talk about a lot of the inspiration that we mentioned, right? So you've got The Rock, we've got V for Vendetta, Chronicles of Riddick, all these, they've got really cool, their prisons all feel different, and Alcatraz, you couldn't ask for something more iconic, at least in the States, for a prison than Alcatraz, right?
Yeah. That is the modern day version of the Count of Monte Cristo.
Right.
It's the island, which adds a whole nother level of isolation and difficulty.
Yeah. What was it called? Chateau d'If? Is that what it was called? I'm pretty sure it was Chateau d'If.
Slept in.
So, but I think, making sure to take some time to sort of lay out the actual prison itself, but not in a dungeon crawly kind of way. Make it interesting. Has it always been a prison? Which is something that I found that some of the old prisons weren't. They were repurposed other buildings. So then you have all these sort of...
I don't mind a classic dungeon crawl layout, but I think you start doing your layout, maybe there should be some key questions the same kinds of questions you sit down and ask yourself about a character before you start to make it up. Who am I? Where did I come from before this? What life experience is informing this?
That's a great way to look at it too, because if you think of it, this is a prison adventure, right? It's not raiding a dragon horde. If you're raiding a dragon horde, dragon is in the name. That's where you should be spending time, right? Dragon, right?
Well, you're not just creating a cave system, right? That's always been there. It's more akin to creating a town in the same way that we've gone about laying out a town in the past. What is this place known for? What is in abundance here? What is in scarcity here? And that can kind of inform trading and leverage and those types of things.
Well, so just sort of tying that one off a little bit is try the idea you said before is treating it like a character, right? So what is the history of this prison? What was it? Has it always been a prison? What is it now? And then you mentioned building it like a city. I think that ties right back to our World of Darkness episode, 100 episodes ago, about what are the factions that exist inside this prison? Are there competing loyalties for different things?
We did one for the sci-fi world where we basically went through and we talked about fashion and religion and culture, and all of those things apply in a prison too. It is very much its own little ecosystem and its own little world that's somewhat informed by the world outside, but not entirely.
Right. It's sort of like this own little microcosm of culture and stuff like that inside a larger thing. Right on. Well, I think that's a pretty good basis of things to make sure that we don't have a boring game that feels flat and forced, right? That's a pretty good list of things to focus on. So let me pitch two different ideas at you here, okay?
All right.
And then once we have so my premise for this sort of GameStorm is that there's someone inside the prison that has something that you need, right? So whether ideally it's not necessarily information, it could be though, or it could be something physical. I haven't really worked that out, right? There's a person inside the prison who has some kind of knowledge or an item or something that you've been hired to go get, right? So I have two different prisons and I have two different historical figures. Okay. So the first one is Newgate Prison, although it's very old. And it is
back then it's just called Gate Prison.
It was just Gate Prison. Boring old Gate Prison.
Free remodel.
So Newgate Prison it's on the corner of Newgate Street and Old Bailey, just inside the city of London. It's a gate in the Roman London Wall, built in the 12th century, and it was demolished in 1904. So if you're playing a modern game, obviously this location doesn't work. It's been extended and rebuilt many times, used for 700 years from 1188 to 1902. So this one has a really cool, long history. There's a picture of it there from Wikipedia from 1810. So, yeah.
It looks actually kind of stately, which is funny. It's just lacking. It's surplus of cinder blocks and doughs.
There's the gate from the... So I'll link this in the show notes so you guys can go to this Wikipedia article and see the stuff there. So there's a big history here, and it housed lots of well-known prisoners, right? So there's a laundry list of people that you could go through there. But for the most part, it seemed kind of your classic stuff, The only some exceptional people I saw was Captain Kidd. There's some interesting people there. Now he's a little later in the period than we're talking about because trying to stay in that 17th century kind of classic Lamentations time period there. But one person that I found on there was actually Jane Voss, which I thought was kind of interesting. So she is a highway robber. And she dies in 1648, which is right in our time period. And so obviously she's a woman, and she ran with a bunch of what were called highwaymen at the time, people robbing the highways. And she was convicted of murder and felonies and robbery and highway robbery and all these other stuff. And it said 7 of her partners were executed. So I just thought I didn't really dig into her too much because there wasn't a whole lot of information there available in my cursory research. But I thought it was just interesting that she is the one that is alive and 7 other people were executed.
Well, were they all men?
I think
besides her.
But they executed women.
Right, but not as frequently.
Not as frequently, but it did happen.
It was still frowned upon.
True. But I thought what that did is
obviously they were taken in by the wickedness of men
right.
because women couldn't naturally have any such ill dispositions.
So I just thought it made it so there was some interesting potential there. Right?
Yeah.
So that's one I found more recently. The one that actually sent me down this rabbit hole is slightly different. So
I like the idea of a highway robber, too, because it's very easy to say, oh, well, someone took something of importance. The rest of her colleagues are dead.
Right.
She's the only one who still has this information.
So I thought
you got a time crunch, like, oh, her execution is coming up. We've got to find out before she kicks the bucket. And then you have to deal with her, who I'm sure, she can't possibly be an easy pushover kind of character like that.
So let me I actually brought up who he died of, so I'll tell you. Jane Voss, highwaywoman thief. She was executed in 1684. So there you go. Alias Jane Roberts. So there's some interesting potential there. There's some cool history to the building that, like long, deep history. So if you want to do something more with that, tying into the Roman wall, you could do various occult things with it, obviously, because if it's that old, all kinds of stuff. A lot of potential there. So the second one is actually called Bridewell Palace. Yeah, so I know you're just thinking palace, prison. Wait, what? So this was actually a palace. It's also in London. And it was built as a residence for King Henry VIII. And
off to a good start.
Right. So it was one of his homes during the earliest 8 years. And it was given to the City of London Corporation by his son, King Edward VI. It was used as an orphanage for wayward children and women. And true.
So it's fancy.
Yeah, but it started off as a king's residence. So it's got to be, it's like this three-story tall building with large courtyards in the center. It's built of bricks. And there's a large, the Fleet River goes by it, and it goes into the River Thames. So it's a really, really big river, obviously. There's one thing, though. Bridewell became the common name because it began to be used as a jail. It's closed in 1855. And it became a jail in 1556. So again, it's another old, not nearly as old as the Newgate, but
I like that it's on a river, though. It sort of lends itself to one of those like Three Musketeers sneaking in by the underground river sort of scenarios that could be a lot of fun.
So this palace was built at the site of a medieval St. Bride's Inn directly south of St. Bride's Church. So there's some history there too, for them buying it and building it on this old place. It's got some saints that are named and tied to it and that kind of stuff. So there's some potential there if you want to kind of involve that kind of stuff. It's 2 big brick courtyards, 3 stories tall. The courtyards are on the inside, so like inner gated courtyards, basically like inside the brick building. A grand processional staircase led them to the outer courtyard. It's the first royal palace not to have a great hall, and its staircase was featured and recurs in Henry VIII's later residences. Kitchens, the gatehouse, long galley, blah blah blah. So this actually seems like be a pretty popular thing. So it talks about when it goes from a residence to an orphanage and so on and so on. So that's the initial one there.
All those, and like the kitchen and those things. I read somewhere the amount that like a royal family ate in one sitting, and it is mind blowing. Basically, it's enough to feed an entire prison full of people.
So the person that I thought that was interesting that was here is Elizabeth Creswell. She was executed in 1698. She's also known as Mother Creswell or Madame Creswell of Clerkenwell. And she's one of the most successful prostitutes and brothel keepers in the English 17th century. She started in houses, got some lists of the houses that she started in. She has a wide net, and she ends up with a giant, widespread network of brothels across London, supplying girls and women all across England. Her employers included wives of soldiers, blah, blah, blah. They were favored by King Charles and his court, figures of government, city guilds, and it gave her basically immunity from prosecution because of the people that they were.
So she accumulated too much power and somebody had it in for her. So how'd she end up in prison?
So during the Bawdy House riots of 1668, apprentices smashed up brothels all across London, including those belonging to Creswell. She's listed as the addressers. There's a satirical work and they list her name in it. Blah, blah, blah. Catholics and Protestants fighting, blah, blah, blah. So she occupied a rare position in the 17th century England. She was common birth, but rose to position of high status as an independent, wealthy, unmarried woman running a substantial business enterprise.
All the boxes of imminent danger.
Exactly. So she figures, and even on top of that, she's in a wide assortment of contemporary literature, songs, ballads, poems. So like everyone knows about her, right? So let me see, life and career, because it goes into why. She's regarded as one of the great figures of the London scene, talented for self-promotion, the beauties of basically from all over the place, far and wide. Okay, so she gets arrested because of these. Here we go. This is where, okay, I found it. So she never married, widely considered to be a lover of city chamberlain Sir Thomas Player, nicknamed Thomas Creswell. He's a Whig. He's an anti-Catholic. He's an anti-Carolinian. Yeah. I thought that was pretty funny as well. So, yeah. Right. So she used to have all these parties at his house in Camberwell, and they were said to often turn into orgies. On one occasion, she provisioned such a party with 300 prostitutes, and the story of the night was promptly turned into a local ballad. So eventually she is kind of connected to some people that run afoul of other people. And she basically tries to distance herself from any kind of political affiliation and is ultimately attacked by Protestants for providing the royal court with women and by Catholics for financing Player, the guy that she was her beau. I think is that how that goes.
So they made religious excuses, but really she butted up with the people.
Right.
They decided she's much too powerful.
Yeah. So in 1681, she's brought to trial and convicted for over 30 years of bawdry. That's in quotes. Many of her own people testified against her. Her buildings and brothels were taken from her. But her business continued as usual, which is interesting. So her health deteriorates while she's later in life. She eventually develops tuberculosis. She wanted to be buried in the manner of Church of England. However, there's one interesting thing about her that I thought. So several accounts claim that in her will, she left £10 for a sermon to be read that said nothing ill of her. After a long search, a young clergyman prepared to perform the funeral rites was found following a lengthy sermon about social morality. He is said to have intoned, "By the will of the deceased, it is expected that I should mention her and say nothing but what was well of her. All I shall say of her, therefore, is this. She was born well, lived well, and died well. For she is born with the name of Creswell, lived at Clerkenwell, and died in Bridewell." So
clever.
I thought, with her sort of, my vision of this is it seems like she's a serious force of personality, right? To sort of live in that world and be as successful as she was and sort of jockey politically to keep afloat and keep out of trouble and not get prosecuted with all of this stuff going on. And then this weird 10-pound provision in her will was kind of like, I wonder, what is that? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's this really kind of just thing that was in there. I thought that was kind of interesting. So in terms of her, there seems to be a lot more information about her than there was about Jane Voss. So that do you think that's sort of the ultimate thumb of the nose at the religious hierarchy that, like, in the end, they had to say something.
You're going to take my money and do what I ask.
Oh man. Who's the prostitute now? That's pretty good. I like that. That is very true.
That's my take on it.
I would agree. I could see that. Especially being a force of, like a force of personality like that. I could be like, got the last laugh. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's the way I'm seeing it anyway. So which of those two do you think, I mean, I realize there's a lot more information on Elizabeth Creswell, but which of those two seems more compelling? in terms of like as a MacGuffin for a story.
No, but I like them both. I just think that one lends itself to sort of an artifact expedition more easily, and one lends itself to a political espionage sort of mission very, easily.
Well, you could do Elizabeth Creswell as a artifact expedition as well, because if she's
could.
Well, but so if she's with I think relatively easily, because she could be hobnobbing with people that are well above what people would consider her station, right? And so this man that she was involved with, they might be involved with secret societies and hiding artifacts and all kinds of stuff. So she may be the person that has that information, So. And so let's choose one first before my mind starts to run away from me. So
no, I like Elizabeth Creswell.
I do too. That was the one I found initially. So I was like, wow, this is really, really cool. Like just a little piece of history or whatever. So all right, so let's do Elizabeth Creswell and the Bridewell Palace Prison. I also thought that Bridewell had some more interesting potential because it used to be a royal palace, basically, right? So there's lots of cool little nooks and crannies that you could hide in and all kinds of stuff that could just be hidden there because
secret passage in for the king
and forgotten about and built over. Right on. So before we start to build this prison and populate it with cool stuff, why don't we figure out what is special about Elizabeth that our characters have to get in there to find or get something? So what is it that she has or knows about, or do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I really like the idea of dirt on a clergy member because of how her story goes, or maybe even just something that puts some extra friction there in the social.
So they're going to be hired by someone to go in there. Now, this is just me, but I also like to sort of turn the tables on things, right? So maybe they get hired to go in there for something and then find out about this artifact or relic or whatever it is, and then it's like, now we have this moral choice of like, well, if we get this, what do we do with it then? Do you know what I'm saying?
Interesting. If this was a mission for the church.
Oh, to go like execute?
No, to get this artifact back. Or maybe she knows somebody who's part of a cult outside the church because of the circle she runs in. And so then you're in a tight spot because you have to like work into her favor while working, to try and be sort of a doubling.
Right. Well, that could be fun too, because then they could go in there with this vision of who this woman is, because whoever hires them portrays her to be one way. And then when you get there and she's something totally different,
yeah, that could like something, or even I think at that level, like a
much harder, like a cardinal or something.
Yeah. No, he obviously a cardinal for sure.
All right. So a cardinal is going to hire our players to go into the prison. And obviously, they're going to be cutouts. They can be denied and blah, 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 whatever. We're all used to that kind of story, right? So he wants them to recover an artifact or the whereabouts of it, right? So what is the artifact?
Well, I think the natural belonging to a saint, right? There's all these ridiculous things like the knuckle bones of St. Peter or whatever. The
7 heads of John the Baptist is my favorite. Yeah. All right. So we're going to have some saintly relic.
Like
okay. All right.
And there's loads of interesting ones out there. Like just Google saintly relics.
So, well, that we can come up with on the back end of things, right?
Body parts.
It also leaves open that if they don't know where it is, well, she might know where it is, or it might just be here, but they don't know, and that could be a possibility where the cardinal hiring them could tell them we have no idea where it is. It might also be in the prison with her because we should have found it by now because we're so resourceful, like one of those kind of, right? So I have this vision of this sort of the cardinal from the Three Musketeers, this sort of arrogant, never gets his own hands dirty, kind of character, right? Red. Right on. Okay, so now our characters have to get into the prison. Now this is, I don't know if it was historically, so there may be some things we have to sort of like tweak a little bit to make it work. But, with a building of this size, it could very easily be a co-ed prison. And it says that actually it was only sections of it were used as a prison. So there are other portions of it that seem to operate in some other capacity. What that is, I don't really know. But there were, there was used for multiple things, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess our players would have two choices, right? They would have the choice to break in, which presents a ton of problems, I think, right? Or to get arrested.
Or to get hired.
Oh, yeah. Or hired. True.
Those are definitely not the only two options.
Well, there's 3. I think those are the 3 easiest ones. And I think any other options would sort of fall within the spectrum of those 3, right? Okay. So, because one of the things I'm thinking here was we focus a lot on lack of choice and then building a larger setting, like a little micro setting inside this prison, right?
Well, the fact that the mission is to speak with someone inside, I think, creates some different choices rather than just automatically, you're arrested, so here you are. Right. So now you actually want to get inside. And now it's your choice how you decide to go about it. And from there, your choices will be markedly limited depending on the decision.
Well, and then if you're a game master that does well with camera 1, camera 2, camera 3 kind of stuff, you can have multiple people. This player's getting arrested. This player's getting hired.
That would be the smartest way to do it.
I agree.
Play it from multiple angles. But
well, right on. All right, so where do you want to go from here? What do you think? Because we have Elizabeth Creswell is pretty much, she's done and built out, right? There's not a whole lot to do with her other than just say, well, she's there, right? And we need to decide what level of importance she is inside the prison. So
I'm going to go with pretty important.
Right. But okay. So among the prisoners, she's pretty important?
I think probably.
Okay.
But I'm sure she's going to be a hometown favorite for sure. So
right.
She's, a woman of legend among the common folk.
True. Yeah, very true. Right on. Okay, so I think the vast majority of prisoners and guards are going to see her in a positive light and maybe cut her some slack, right? However, the reason she gets locked up is because of some purity laws and that kind of stuff that kind of come about. So I think we're going to have a few, both guards and prisoners that are there that are going to have like a puritanical view of the world. And, they'll be difficult or hard on her for that, right? And I realize, a lot of this stuff in this time period is very, very focused on sort of Protestant Catholic kind of dynamics that existed in England. So you don't have to go down that road if you don't want to, if that's something that doesn't work at your table, and you could just focus on the puritanical side of it versus the people that don't seem to care about that much about sex and, brothels and whatnot, and just go that route. But
I think it could be fun to make up some key NPCs and just roll random to see Catholic, Protestant.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And flavors, the interactions from there.
That could make for an interesting random table thing to see where people end up on,
Sort of make the classic XY plane, right? Catholic, Protestant, conservative,
right?
Ultra conservative. Those are the only two options. Then there's no.
Right on. I like that. That's a good idea. All right. So then,
on a scale of liberty, Puritan.
Yeah. Well, there's in the Newgate prison, one of the prisoners that was in there was I think it's Giovanni Casanova, and he's in there for being a libertine and bigamy, which I thought was that's where the Casanova, that's where it comes from or whatever. Mm-hmm. So all right, so this is our way into the prison now. This is sort of like we have our MacGuffin for why they need to get in there, and then the three main roads for them to take to get in there, right? So let me ask you one thing before we go forward. Our relic that we have, on a scale of like 1 to 10, 1 being like this holy relic cures athlete's foot, to 10 being like this resurrects people from the dead or something, right? The Lazarus stone or whatever. How powerful do you think this relic should be?
I think it's pretty powerful because this is not a lady who's a nobody. And you've been asked by a cardinal to go retrieve something. Right. So it can't just be the foot cream of John the Baptist.
Right.
It's gotta be a little more important than
John
that.
the Baptist anti-itch cream. Right. So we're going to say, how about a 7+? Does that sound?
Yeah, I think that.
So then we'll leave that open because depending on what your game has or needs or whatever, it could suit. You could make whatever item that suits your game.
6 to 8 range.
Okay.
I'm not going to go 9 or 10 because then Inquisitors would be handling this the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Kicking down doors and right. I agree with that. You're probably right. And then also there's going to be something about it that's sensitive that they want to keep quiet. So that's why they don't just go in and torture it out of her. They need to.
Maybe it's something that had already been recovered by the church and was stolen.
Oh, so they don't want to let that out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was, and then we should lay some personal responsibility at the cardinal's feet. That's why he's doing this. Mm-hmm. So.
And maybe that's why Inquisition, because the other people of the church also don't know that it's missing.
Yeah. There's just an empty bottle of foot cream on the shelf, and they're like, oh, wait, this isn't St. John's foot cream.
We keep it locked in the chest.
Right.
To gaze at it with your unholy.
This is just coconut butter.
Right. Pineapple juice colada.
Right. All right. So I think that we have our relic here, right? But I also think that there's some potential where if they befriend Elizabeth Creswell in some kind of a way, or it comes out why they're there, that she probably has a lot of dirt on people that she probably hasn't released. So there's some potential there for...
Perhaps even so.
Yeah, obviously. So there's some potential there for some leverage that she would have to give them for favors or whatever, right? And I think, well, why don't we follow through with how we usually do things with the end of this, right? So what are our potential successful or unsuccessful endings? Obviously, unsuccessful looks like you get caught, you stay in jail. Cool story, right?
Or worse.
Yeah,
you get executed.
Right. But what...
That'd be a sad TPK.
So I think
excommunicated. That could be interesting.
One potential ending, I think, could be you have this, depending on what stage of life we're talking about with Elizabeth Creswell, she gets sick with tuberculosis. So maybe she wants to be taken out and go somewhere sunny and die, as opposed to living in this prison, right? And if we have characters that are sympathetic to her and want to help her, that can make for an interesting challenge. Not that they have to do it, but that option gets presented there. Mm-hmm. And then she has some leverage to say, if you can get me out of here, I have all of this political whatever,
I like the idea of the sob story, last farewell, delivering this sealed letter, which inevitably is not what she says it is and ends up getting you in terrible trouble later.
Oh, right on. Well, I'm just such a big fan of things that seem innocuous and then turn out to be, oh no, what just happened? Not that you're trying to pull the double switch every time.
I mean, the crying on her
right.
last throes.
Deathbed of coughing up blood from tuberculosis.
Asking to deliver this letter.
Oh, well, speaking of TB, a potential is happy birthday. Everybody gets TB, right? Congratulations, you're successful. You have consumption.
Just be a semi-annual role in the setting of
just
the 17th century anyway.
Roll for slow death. Right on. So obviously one potential thing is that they recover the item or the location and just leave with it. They're like, it is just a straight up regular success.
They could recover the item and try to kiss the church that did not recover the item.
Old double cross.
Steal them.
Or just keep it for themselves because, hey, maybe it's useful. My feet always itch after hard days of adventuring. Yeah. So I think broadly speaking, that's probably, five different choices, depending on whose side they take. You have a couple different choices, around. Alrighty. So shall we build out this place of terror, right? And so let me ask you this. Since this is a historical location, do you think we need to spend a ton of time because we're going to be able to have maps and all that kind of stuff of this actual physical location? Do we need to spend time sort of building that out, or should we focus more on the actual personalities that are there?
I don't think we need to spend a lot of time. So is it easy to find this location as a prison or just as a previous palace? I don't know how deep in the weeds you got into looking.
I saw maps. I didn't really dig into them too much, but I think
they would need to tweak things at all.
Maybe a little bit, but I think that just sort of, I'll have to do some looking and see, but I know there are maps of it, but the question is how much, or when the maps are of, do you know what I'm saying? It's like the physical location will look the same, but maybe the what's in each room is different. So
I would definitely go through and add on top of the map, a certain number of secret hidey holes and passages and things like that.
So let's just go through some things to specifically add or mention that we would be putting in the map, right? So you like hidey holes, which I agree, and passages. I like the idea of large abandoned areas that aren't used. So they're just storage area. This is where we put all the royal furniture from when. And yeah, sure, the royal people were going to come pick it up and take it to the other palace, but they just never did. So now it just sort of sits there. So you have these big open spaces. They're just full of old stuff, right?
It could be really fun to have just one, I don't want to call it a haunted room, but this was left to us by Sir Edward, but under strict orders that this one particular room was not to be used. And then just have a list of rumors about said room.
Well, and then if you have your person who goes in and gets hired, part of their orientation is, so on the east wing, the door at the end of the hall on the south side, that door stays locked no matter what, and no one goes in there.
Well, what's in?
It doesn't matter. We don't go in there. But I like that's a really cool idea. Haunted room, off limits, rumors. Right on. So it's 16th century. It was used as a orphanage for a long time. I like the idea maybe of just a weird, empty, abandoned area that is like the classic orphans where it has just a row of beds with footlockers, but they're child-sized beds. Do you know what I'm saying? Like empty and dusty, the billowy curtains, like I think there's some good creepy potential, do you know what I mean? For that kind of stuff.
Or you could have a children's ward.
That too. So
which is awful in its own right.
True. What else? I got one real quick. What about it's 1600s? There are glorious medical treatments for the criminally insane. So what is essentially a modern reformatory chamber, right?
Very good.
With all the updated science behind dunking chambers, dunking chairs, and the cooling bath thing that they used to put you in. We talked about that in the medical episode, didn't we?
Yes.
Those were terrible.
That was long.
Yeah.
They're all.
I'm going to put medical therapy.
Although blanket, maybe come back.
All right. So anything else to add specifically?
I would add just odd relics and artifacts that don't normally make any sense in a prison, but like it used to be a palace. So whether it's like a mural or like a couple leftover paintings that somebody didn't want,
right.
Or, they don't have to be particularly of value, but just odd things that you can find about the place that don't seem to make a lot of sense for the setting.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things kind of jarring because like, what? Why is there this giant tapestry hanging in this prison, right?
Right, exactly.
So we mentioned there's already some courtyards, and so I like the idea, like in Bronson. We didn't mention that one for the movies either, Bronson. Dang it. So in that movie, there's when they're sort of sitting there, there's a large courtyard or indoor courtyard, like an indoor big ballroom kind of area, right? And so all the inmates are sort of like moving around and doing things there. So like the idea of these big open spaces inside, you know what I mean? And then at the same time, you have these large open areas, then you have these incredibly small and confined areas, right?
I like the idea of sort of an anamorphous garden because, topiaries and trimmed hedges were a big thing.
Oh, like
but obviously they don't have anybody that's going to be up that, and prisoners can't be trusted with hedge clippers.
Right.
So they're just like sort of overgrown and shaggy, and you can maybe like they're clearly not shaped like regular bushes.
Right. Like, why does it look that way? Yeah. I like that. That's awesome. Right on. All right, so that's 7 things right there. Do we have any more to add, or do you want to move on to our guards and prisoners?
I would like to add just, I mentioned it already, but scarcities and
oh, yeah. Yep.
And abundances, because I think it's a cool way to inform a prison economy. I think one of the big tropes that you always see about prisons is like overcrowding, but this seems sort of an exceptional place.
Yeah,
so I think under abundance, they actually have, I don't want to say it's necessarily abundance of space, but compared to what you would think of for a prison.
So there are areas within abundance of space.
Yes.
Right on.
And under abundance is just based on what we have. I would also say a place to hide persons and or things.
For scarcities, I think I don't want to do our classic tropes. Those are kind of a given with like good food and that kind of stuff, right? Those are kind of dull. What if we say a scarcity of, I don't know how to word this, but what if we talked about guards being corrupt, right? Mm-hmm. So what if we have a thing where every guard wants to get their piece? So I've paid off guard number 1, right? And guard number 2 heard about it. So then guard number 2 is going to come to me and be like, hey, where I got to get my piece too. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like, I don't know if that, might consider that an abundance of like corruption, but like it's a specific style. Do you know what I'm saying? Not like broad general, because like it's not like there's a prison union in 16 whatever.
It's like
I think in the context
reliability.
In the context, I don't know what the word for that is, but in that context, does that make sense? Do you think that's reasonable to do? Do you think that adds to anything or no? Because what I'm envisioning is that there's always a moment for you to bribe your way out of any situation with a guard, right? And then once that happens, now guard number 2 is going to come up. And then eventually you're not going to be able to pay up. So then you're going to have to do something for them. Do you know what I'm saying? Whether that's strong arm an inmate or do whatever. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's like a scarcity of established networks, if that makes, because when things are run by 2 or 3 established entities, then that sort of thing doesn't happen.
How about a scarcity of organized corruption?
Okay.
Does that? I think it's a good. I was trying to find a way to word that, and I don't know what it was. But does that make sense? Does that fit that?
Yeah.
Okay. But I think it's among the guards, right?
It could be among.
Right on. Well, I wanted to lay it out and kind of have a couple factions, although I guess you could still be every man for themselves.
Well, you can still have faction. Maybe it's one of those things where nobody's really found a solid foothold yet, and it's still very dynamic.
Right. So we need another.
And that could also be part of the why with Creswell could be such a feat, because he is a unifying factor in a place where there aren't many unifying factors.
Right. Alrighty. I do too.
It should be an actual physical something.
So I have this, with what we've laid out, it seems like there's going to be lots of, easy ways to find like clubs or small knives or whatever, right? Or makeshift knives. So what if we have a scarcity that is not necessarily security, but they're the new people that are here, right? Which comes with a certain amount of uncertainty and danger, right? Does that make sense? Okay.
I want like a concrete thing. Like you could bargain with this if you had it, because there is none here.
Oh, right. Okay.
Like the currency is based on this thing that you cannot acquire. Alcohol, opium makes sense, but
well, alcohol's the volume is too big to bring in. Opium could work. Opium would make sense, and especially in this time period, potentially. I think the dates, but something like that, or even we could just do cold hard cash. It's hard, everybody, when you get processed, people get search and frisked or whatever, right? So you just don't have, there's no money inside, right? And if you have, cash is king.
But you're in a place with not a lot to do and not a lot of time. You had dice, cards,
reading
material,
that. Right on.
Or
entertainment.
Any way to pass the time.
All right, so let's just say entertainment, which would include dice, cards, books, whatever, right? And then I think we'll just put on here some kind of, I'm going to put a $sign, and then I like your opiates idea, opium or whatever, those kind of things as well. Right on. All right, so why don't we build out a couple guards and a couple interesting inmates? I don't think we need to build out any more of Creswell, right? She's pretty well done, right? So let's start with inmates. And I think my first one I think to do is Creswell's not healthy. So she's going to have some sort of handler or bodyguard, but I don't want him to be just some, I'm Gronk, the bodyguard. You know what I'm saying? Gronk. Right, exactly. So, what is this person? Like, why are they interesting?
I think that this pretty boy. And whether that means it's a woman in disguise or it's just a man who's exceptionally beautiful, like he's physically handy and at combat, but maybe he, this person is someone that looks slight and is, just given her background, like
right on,
nice to look at.
Right on. Sort of like a dandy, or with quotes around that, as they would say. Right. No, I like that. I like that a lot. Plus, I like the idea of this sort of hidden danger. Like people say so-and-so, you don't mess with them, right? They are going to put it on you, and it's going to be bad for you. And then you meet them, and you're like, wait, them? Like that? What? Surely not. It's a great moment for the fighter to wonder about what's happening or whatever. So
somebody less physically ominous and more very, very dexterous.
I have dandy, beautiful, very good. I'm going to have them actually be not well dressed, but like clean and groomed.
Covered it.
Yes. How do you know he's a king? Right.
Well, that's interesting too, because somebody clean shaven, that would imply that they have something sharp with which to shave. Oh. So it's like sending a signal and also being welcomed all at the same time.
Yes, clean shaven. It does. It sends a very clear message that every day you see them and they look freshly shaved, right? That's really good. Because it does send a message like, I will cut you. Right on. Okay, so when it comes to their motivations, are they loyal to Elizabeth or not? Or are they just here for the money or the...
Oh, I see them as being somebody loyal. I think it's somebody that she knows from the outside. Like, she has a very well-established relationship with. Perhaps even someone that got arrested to continue a relationship.
Right. That's what I was thinking, they came on the inside to be here to protect and kind of stuff. Right on.
Or ride or die.
Right on. All right, so another inmate then. If that's some kind of opposition, right? So what if we do some kind of puritanical person who has done terrible things in the name of, purity and whatever, right? And that's why because they're here in prison, right? They have to get incarcerated for something, right? So it's someone who we could go down the laundry list of like arson and whatever, and they're just a bad, terrible person, that
I read an interesting thing when we were going through. I was reading like about different women deadliness when we were doing research with the poison book. And I can't remember all the details, but I think in this scenario, it was somebody who was Scottish. So it was like in the period of time when like there's English and Scottish things happening and then like the Catholics are coming over and all of this. So then there's like a priest who's basically doing battle with this woman who is of high standing in this Scottish town, and her brother happens to be the sheriff. So they basically take turns with her and this priest getting arrested off and on. If she comes up with something and it's her brother, but then she gets out and then now he's arrested. And then finally, like, the church itself has to intervene and like knock it off, and he ends up getting excommunicated, it's a big thing. So maybe it's something like that. Like this is someone who was in good standing with the church, but just pushed too hard on the wrong person, and then took it too far after the church said drop it and leave alone because of pride.
So are they like a physical danger, like physically violent danger, or no?
I mean, I don't think they're a slouch, because, but I think they're more a danger because of their ability to rally people to the cause of indecency, Basically, I don't think they're completely physically inept, but their main danger is in
through
like
incitement.
A charisma and a leadership, similar to Creswell.
So are they actively trying to find a way to cause a problem or smother Creswell or something? Do you know what I'm saying?
I don't think that is happening yet. Okay. I think it could be a direction that the players could push things into.
Especially if they find out that she knows where some relic is.
But I think at this point, it's just sort of gathering the masses. And like I said, people are lacking for entertainment anyway. So maybe this person does give a really good sermon.
Right.
And so people are beginning to gather and listen and friendly and amass behind this person.
And we'll do 3 of each, you think? 3 inmates and 3 guards? Okay. Because I think, like, ideally you would lay out probably 6 or 8 of each, right? But just for the purposes of what we're doing here, I think we'll just do 3 of each, and then because we're about an hour right now, a little over. So,
well, and I think kind of rolling up your prison population should look a lot like rolling up your population in town. So, these were the professions people used to have. Are they going to be positive, neutral, or negative towards the players in general? Just blurbs to make them playable.
So we have someone who's going to protect Elizabeth, and then someone who wants to sort of go against her. So now we need someone who is sort of a wild card, I guess, but it still could potentially useful to the characters.
So every prison movie, every when I worked in an actual prison, there were the people that did things for the prison, like the porter kind of people, people that the guards turned to if they had a task that they didn't want to do, but hey, I can kind of rely. It's a tenuous system, but someone who has garnered the trust as being a reliable person by the guards for some kind of task, be it helping serve food on the line, helping in the kitchen.
No. And it works too, because then that person could potentially be leveraged for help or favors by the players, because there's always some kind of currency or give and take system, right? So you do whatever with the guards. If you do this for us, I'll pay you. So who is this person?
I like the idea of it being someone who is older. So this is someone who's been here for a while to earn that trust.
Okay, they know the ropes. So what are they actually? So I kind of like the idea of...
Long John Silver is a really interesting character in the Treasure Island book. It could be like that, and he's a cook, and or at least he says he is, and actually on the ship.
Oh yeah, in Black Sails. Yeah.
I meant Treasure Island.
No, I was just thinking Black Sails. I realized there's a lot of some prison stuff in that too. I was thinking the old guy from Shawshank.
Oh yeah, I don't even remember what he for.
Murder.
Oh.
But he'd been there for so long that it just sort of, because he was in there since he was a kid. That was part of the premise of the thing. I can't remember what his name.
I mean, in this time period, it doesn't have to be. It could be gambling debts.
Yeah, it's true. So we'll just leave that open, though. I just like, because some of those things you can let it to flavor the character for why they're here and how they see being here. But if he's
if it's something, because it can't be too serious, again, because they would have just killed him.
Right.
Or if it is serious, then you need to make it part of his backstory. Why were you not taken care of?
Right. So he could be some kind of a low level noble or something, or from a prominent family, and that's sort of why. But either way, it's all good. So he's been here for a long time, and he is the porter that sort of is reliable to the guards, and they go to for favors. So right on. All right, so our guards. So our first guard, I think that we have to have the classic guard on a power trip, right? But that's boring. So I think we need to spice that up somehow. Do you know what I'm saying? So,
bam.
So like why what is the story with this guy? Like why or do we just sort of say there's the classic guy on a power trip and then we move and
but there always is.
I know,
because those people are drawn to that job.
I agree. I understand.
Sometimes it is what it is.
Yeah.
I know it's a trope, but
it's
it's a trope for a reason.
So how do we make them more interesting and a more full character?
So I've got a couple of potential options.
Okay.
One, he is a member of some kind of outside organization of ill repute, and he is currently in charge of the supply line for whatever the thing or whatever that is coming into the prison. And so that's part of his power trip sort of situation. Two, he is he's the son of the important. Mm-hmm. He has had a chip on his shoulder from the beginning. Mm-hmm. He is, related to the person who runs this particular prison. He is the third son of some noble, one of those kind of situations.
I like both of them.
Or there's always the opposite of that. Like, I've never been anybody. I'm not anybody on the outside, but when I come here.
Yeah, but that one seems kind of boring. I like the idea of them actually, because then it would give the players potential for something, for leverage over them should it come out, right? So that depends on what levers they pull, because we're trying to make sure we have interesting choices for them, right? So if they pursue down, because someone has to know that he's the source, right, somewhere, Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? So he's the source of
substances,
contraband. And I think probably this person is in line to be warden or whatever that title would be, right? Like they're the next up.
Second in command.
Right. All right. So another guard. So what if we have the guard who is... So our guard on a power trip, right? He's the actual source of everything, but he can't be seen publicly like distributing any kind of contraband, right? So he has to have someone do that for him. So what if we make that person, right? So the guard that he trusts enough to sort of actually do the work part of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the actual illicit component of this, right? But he's the actual source. Does that make sense? Okay. So we're going to call this person the fixer guard. So why do they do this? Why don't they just cold hard cash, baby?
Sometimes that's the answer.
True story. Right on. All right. Which is an easy thing to leverage over if you wanted to sway them to your side to sort of, shift the balance of power or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Right on. So do they have a weakness besides money?
I think they're just pliable in general. Like, there's just a guy doing a job.
Right on. So that just doesn't see any kind of higher level of morality or thought to any of it. It's just I'm flexible and I do what is best for me.
Got mouths to feed at home. Got like 12 of them.
Sounds good.
Catholic.
It's all good.
So I think our last guard, it would be easy to make him someone friendly or whatever, but I think our last guard should be somebody who's actually doing the work of keeping the prison running. Like the guy with his chip on his shoulder, like everybody knows that person who is an officer or whatever is at the top, but like the sun is just shining on them because they know the right palms to grease. They're not actually doing the job. They're not keeping the ship in order and keeping it running. So this person is our person who is keeping it on course.
Right on.
That doesn't mean they're like hard-nosed or disagreeable necessarily, but they are a little bit more of a stickler for the rules than anybody else.
Well, no, and I think that's just, an easy way to look at it too, that like, right, wrong, or indifferent, this is how it has to be.
Which does make them approachable for certain. They are hardworking and they are probably older. Okay. Again, kind of like our porter person. They've been doing this job longer. They've been passed over for the promotion because they don't.
Right.
So, and that also creates a little bit of conflict within the guard structure.
Well, and then it kind of creates this sort of natural alliance between this guard and our porter character. So, right on. they're the ones that are sort of always keeping things going and whatever. All right, so then I imagine they have this vision of just sort of filling out more guards and inmates from there, and then sort of lumping them into some kind of broad categories, but categories that don't revolve around Elizabeth Creswell. So that way you're building a more full political faction inside the prison, right? So like whether in your game that is Catholic or Protestant or however it is, you know, whether it's Mistra or Torm, I don't even know, whatever gods you want to use in whatever kind of context you're using. Or if you just want to take it outside that realm and do some kind of political thing, whether that's, you know, royalists or Parliament people, right? You know, however, those are probably the terrible terms and not correct at all, but whatever. You get the point, though, right? So you're making, broadly speaking, some kind of factions that loosely relate and bind people. Well, they bind people together, but they loosely relate to Elizabeth Creswell and how our characters are interfacing with all this, right? Because we don't want the entire world spinning around our MacGuffin. We want to build a full world that has our MacGuffin in it.
I think it'd be interesting to build just or two side plots for the guards and the inmates that someone within that system on their own that's not at all related to the players and it's just happening in the background, but they can stumble upon it and get involved through luck or bad luck of their own, or even use that as leverage pro quo situation.
Well, I actually have this vision of a what just happened table, right? So you would decide what just happened in the prison. And so why did that happen? And who was responsible for it? And who doesn't want to see it happen, you know? And just answer those couple, 4 or 5 basic questions about whatever it was that just happened. And that sets in motion whatever is happening in the prison right now. And ideally, our characters aren't actually going to be in there for very long. So we're looking maybe a week, right? So they're going to have to, if they're going to get thrown in jail, they need to do something that's serious enough to get them thrown in jail, but not long enough for more than a week or two, right? So some kind of petty theft or whatever it is, you know, drunken disorderly, one of those kind of deals, right? Right on. Well, do you like this? Do you think this is something here worth pursuing and doing? Or because I thought it was just one of those things where I kind of was like, what could we talk about that's interesting that we haven't kind of pursued yet? And it was like, well, what if we look at classic tropes for adventures that don't seem to go very well? And the prison and captured adventure is always one that seems to struggle. And lots of people like to run it because it is all over the media that we consume that have informed role-playing games, right? So I just thought it would be kind of fun to tackle it and see. So, yeah. Well, do you have anything else to as we close this one off? Or so I think we have a pretty good start here, but I think that to fully flush this out, because we talked about making a full setting and scenario for this, that there needs to be probably between 3 and 7 more guards and 3 and 7 more inmates made. So you actually have not that you have to use them all, but you have them already sort of laid out and so that they're thought through and interesting and have a broad spectrum of personality types and what their agenda is, right? So this is just enough to kind of get you rolling and get you started. But ideally, you should have, you know, roughly give or take, say 10 guards, 10 inmates, or not even guards, maybe groundskeepers and all that other kind of stuff, people that work at the facility that aren't inmates, right? Right on. All righty. I think that'll do it for us. Hopefully you guys get something useful out of this. If you guys decide to pursue and put this together and bring this to your own table, give us a shout out and let us know. I'd be curious to see how things go for you and what changes that you made at your table to make it work for you and your players. Along with that, if you know of any other sort of classic tropes of adventures that are that thing where people struggle with them to get them to come off well and run them well, drop us a line and hit us up and let us know, because I'd be curious to see. I've got a few more rolling around the back of my head, but I'd be curious to see if there's anything else that anybody has that they've seen that would be interesting for us to tackle. So you can hit us up on our Facebook group, or hit me up on Twitter at Just One More Fix, or you can email me, James at Just One More Fix, and we'd love to sort of chase those ideas down and see what we can't come up with. As you know, we're a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so you can head over to GonnaGeekNetwork.com and check out all the awesome geeky podcasts they have over there for more geeky podcasting and all that kind of stuff. If you like what we do here at Just One More Fix, you can head over to patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix and support us over there and get access to all of our raw audio feeds and pre-shows, as well as our zine in PDF or print format, depending on what level you support us at, and join the awesome ranks of our other Patreon supporters like Ellen White, Alistair H., Simon McNair, Timothy Barra, Hector Treelane, Tiziano Furlano, and the OG Todd Olson. I think that'll do it for us this week, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.